So, guys, I was watching Debbie Does Dallas 2 today, and I do want to say that, before I start, I do like watching controversial films. I remember when I was in college, I did a project on black exploitation films. So I watched like Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, and I always just like reviewing controversial content and really, really edgy stuff. And I think it's like Cinema Underground is a YouTube channel where he reviews a lot of just like horror and more violent exploitation films. Like, unfortunately, I can't really review horror because I do get like kind of, I have very, I kind of get like nightmares very easily and other things like that, really. So it's just like kind of like one of those things that I get easily disturbed. So definitely there's other exploitation genres that I can like walk away from and not kind of be in psychological distress. But I also like reviewing films like this because obviously I do believe in free speech. And I also kind of believe in looking at old work and being like, how does it kind of hold up in today's society or and other things like that. So I do want to kind of give a bit of a summary because sometimes I see people like, why are you reviewing adult films, older adult films, and I just want to explain that I just believe in free speech, and I just like controversial shit. So without further ado, Debbie Does Dallas, too. It's not really that great of a movie, and that a lot of people were watching this film in the 80s because obviously two things did happen. A couple of things did happen that like Hustler says that this film is like 100%, and that's almost like a Rotten Tomatoes saying it's a 100% score. This is not a good film in a lot of ways, and the reason why I kind of think they did that was because obviously Debbie Does Dallas 1 was a very controversial film, and it came out in 1978, the same year that The Deer Hunter won Best Picture. So obviously, sometimes what happens is that they may like kind of favor a future film or a sequel because they kind of wish they could have given the first film, obviously, all those accolades. I think that that's one thing. The other thing too was that obviously in the late '70s, Bambi Woods became a large sex symbol. So it's like obviously you attach a obviously you attach like awards and ratings to something, it's kind of like just living up to that legend and all that. And then also the other thing too is that a couple of years after this film, um, Bambi Woods disappeared, and that was a big controversy in like the porn industry. And and it was kind of like I think it was kind of revealed like a couple that she was actually married and she lives in Iowa and she's actually almost 70 years old. But it was definitely for a few reasons. Like she was kind of saying in an interview, I think in an Australian magazine, like she disappeared because obviously she was getting a bunch of negative attention. Definitely, she was always being encouraged to do more films and do more things that she was uncomfortable with. And then also she had a daughter, so she was kind of almost like, she was also afraid for her daughter. Like they'll be like, okay, maybe people will approach her and be like, okay, Debbie Does Dallas, you know, next generation or something like that. So she just wanted to live her life really. So definitely, both Debbie films do live in infamy, and this is a huge drop in quality. The other thing was that Ron Jeremy appears in this film, and a lot of people, and I think that this is actually the first No, this might be the first Ron Jeremy movie. He did appear in adult magazines in the '70s, but obviously, you know, Ron Jeremy was kind of like the big celebrity, like John Holmes of adult films, and like during the golden era, and then also there was Bambi Woods. She's kind of considered like the godmother of these films, and and Ron Jeremy's considered, and John Holmes are kind of considered like the Godfather. So there was definitely a big deal to see him, and definitely I think the approach is when you see them as celebrities, you're like, yeah, like this is awesome. When actually you look at these films, they're not that well made. And then also too that a lot of younger people may not realize that definitely a lot of the attitude in adult films, especially in the past, was definitely to be very objectifying of women, to really violate sexual boundaries. It's almost like if it's almost like in a lot of these films. A woman may be forced to give oral sex and do other things on a man, or have their clothes stripped off, or have somebody make out with them, or have somebody or be kissing a guy and be okay with it, and then their clothes get ripped off and they're like no, and then they say no a bunch of times, and then they eventually warm up and like what's going on, really. Like, obviously, you look at that nowadays and people will say that that's definitely sexual assault. And then also too, it's bad because you cannot really encourage people and encourage, like, your viewers to be like, okay, well, that's just what sex is. That it's really about what the man wants. And if the man wants something to happen, really, they just have to go for it. And if the girl's like no, you just keep on doing it, and then eventually they give in. That's not that is sexual assault, really. And I do want to get into this film, that and then those things are all really important, but you see a bunch of that in this film. And some of it is and I'm definitely going to talk about the sex scenes and other things like um to the best decency. I'm going to talk about it, but I'm not going to be just explicit for the sake of being explicit. But what happens in this film is that, in the original film for Debbie Does Dallas, Debbie is 16 years old. However, the actress who plays her, Bambi Woods, is like in her 20s. So in the original Debbie Does Dallas, what happens is this actress, Bambi Woods, who's 23 years old, is playing a 16-year-old who 16 or 17-year-old who wants to go to try out for the Dallas cheerleaders. So she's trying to make all the money as possible, and she ends up prostituting herself for a trip to Dallas, Texas. So in this film, this is really about her actually trying to come home from that trip. And I think what happens is that she ran out of money, so she kind of has to find a way to get back to her place in Texas. And I believe it's from Dallas to Houston or Dallas to Austin or something like that, one of the big cities. So obviously she's kind of like, the first scene, she's kind of like hitchhiking on the road. And what happens is that she gets picked up by like two police officers. And what happens is that they're saying that she has unruly behavior. So they bring her to jail. And what happens is that she's actually kind of left alone with one police officer, and she's kind of put in a jail cell. So in that jail cell, she's forced to strip down, and she kind of says no because she kind of knows that this is not really a police officer telling her to strip down and change clothes because a police proceeding. She knows that he wants to get his dick off. So what happens is she says no a bunch of times, and then actually he goes in and intimidates her, and she complies with stripping naked. And then what happens is that she says, like, I'm not going to turn my body around so you see her butt and her naked butt and whatever. And then he goes to the jail cell and he gets in it, and he forces her to perform oral sex on him. And it's as I said, that, she kind of resists, and then she's actually doing the act, and then she actually has, sex with him. And, like doggy style. And she's actually like, making out and just, being cool with it. So it's ultimately bad because, it's bad because it's ultimately teaching what I've said before, which is, the best way, which is in a lot of older films, and I'm saying it sarcastically, they teach, quote unquote, the best way to have sex with a woman is that when they say no, you keep on going and pushing what you want. And I say that sarcastically because obviously, in the eyes of 2023, 2024, that is sexual assault, and that should not be done. And then also there has to be something to be said that it features a bunch of stereotypes. That obviously, Bambi Woods is a dumb, blonde-haired, blue eyes, young white girl in Texas. So she plays the dumb bimbo to a T, and then obviously you have the police officer doing that, so you're kind of playing with that idea of how police officers have authority to do what they want. Definitely during this time, that obviously there were times that police officers could get away with sexually assaulting females if they wanted to. There was definitely the other thing too is that there were some jails like that where it's like one police officer supervising and a hot woman comes in and she has to go to jail. Sometimes there may be a thing about, okay, well, if there's going to be prostitution, they both do. He gets what he wants, and then he releases her and says, "Okay, well, you're free to go," or "Okay," and that's what happens to Debbie is that she's kind of like, he's like, "Okay, I'm going, after this, I'm gonna like drop you off, really." And all that, really, so it's definitely kind of really controversial. And there's actually a story that the British they cut the scene out, definitely for that reason, because it was definitely it was a mix of a domination and a rape fetish type of thing, and that's that, really. And then what happens is that he gives her a ride, and what happens is that I think it was him and some other police officer. They take her to a brothel, and the idea is to sell her into prostitution. And I think that what happens is that when they pick up women and they bring them there, what happens is ultimately that they may not make any money, but they're just there to kind of be like, okay, well, there's 50 girls there, so I'm gonna get a free ticket with one of the girls if I bring them more girls. So it's almost like, okay, well, you have access to whatever you want, really, instead of actually an exchange of money. So it's definitely, egregious. But also during that time, even though this brothel kind of reminds you of a lot of the ones you see in those old cowboy films, that was still going on very big in the 80s and other points in history where there was kind of like, sex trafficking of people and all that, really, So, again, just being very, very controversial. And I kind of would say that if you kind of look at the film, really what happens is that she's trying to get back to her home. She gets left at the brothel, and then the brothel's run by her aunt, and then after watching some sexual activity she wants to stay there, and then it kind of ends with her doing some sexual acts, and then she's talking to the camera like breaking the fourth wall, and just kind of telling some jokes and kind of just like cheering the audience, really. So that's the whole film. But it's definitely, a very low quality because obviously it features a lot of Texan stereotypes. A girl like just rejecting her sexuality and then being into sexual stuff. That's not really out of the box, really. And then also too, like the first scene and the last scene, and there's another scene. It's like beginning, middle, and end. Bambi Woods does 3 sexual scenes, so it didn't really have the same I don't know, like edgy storyline as the original film, which was a bunch of porn actresses that are in their 20s playing characters that are teenagers that are trying to make money for a trip, and then they actually naively do prostitution, and they're kind of cool with it, So this is kind of like more like not living up to the same standard. And I do kind of think that, as they say with some adult films, that a lot of times when people write the scripts for adult films, more than likely it's something that, they're going to do filming on Saturday. So it's more like something that somebody bullshits on Friday night, really. There's really no thought and anything like that. I would kind of even praise that the only good thing that they did really was the outdoor cinematography. And then also when you look at a lot of the adult film scenes in this film, a lot of them are just very bad. Obviously the first scene in the jail is very poorly lit. There are some scenes where it's like, unless it's oral sex, you really can't see what else is going on, really, because of either bad camera angles or either just really, in really, really dark buildings. And then also, I think what happened back then was that they did a lot of overexposure, which means that if you're filming in a very dark area, what you do is that you work with a sensitive film grain, so that's very sensitive to light. So therefore, it's all grainy, and you don't do something like put more lights in a certain area or whatever, because that's more expensive. It was meant to, like, this film was just meant to kind of be a cash grab or whatever, really, and kind of give you a sequel to Debbie Does Dallas. It really wasn't meant to be filmed in a good. It wasn't meant to kind of be filmed in a way that was more cinematic. It was not meant to be a movie where they tried out some new ideas and anything like that. It was just really just there to kind of make money. And I think, as I've said, that sometimes when you watch a film, like I remember watching a film called Revenge of the Green Dragons, and I remember watching it. A lot of people watched this film because you saw it was produced by Martin Scorsese, so you thought it was a good film, but it actually turned out to be one of the worst pieces of shit you could ever see, and that's kind of one of the reasons why this film has a 100% rating by Hustlers. That is trying to like make you want to watch the film when it's actually not that well made. So what happens is that she goes to the what happens? I gotta see the fucking I'm sorry guys. I have to see the fucking trash man's coming. You know, because that he's a noisy motherfucker. So what happens is that actually when she's at the brothel, the girls kind of take advantage of her and they kind of treat her like almost like, you know, like you're lost, you have no respect. It's actually kind of revealed that the owner of the brothel is actually a madam, and she's actually Debbie's aunt. So obviously she's saying like, you know what, she's saying like a couple of things, you know, like, well, they're going to take care of you, the girls are going to run you a bath. And what happens is that she's also saying too that maybe the best thing for her is to go home instead of just staying around this, because she doesn't want her to be involved in this lifestyle of a prostitution. And obviously it's, you know, her relative, so it's kind of a double standard of how, you know, if some people are pimps or some people in a brothel or whatever, you know, they want their relatives or their daughters to be little ladies, but they are looking to traffic more people and other things like that. So Debbie does a couple of sex scenes, lesbian sex scenes, and then she also does another one at the end of the film where it's more like oral, and then some more oral, and then it's some, you know, like missionary. But it's also, as I said before, that the way they filmed it, you really can't see what's going on just because of like the camera angles and other things like that. So it does kind of feel like stuff you would see like in an R-rated movie instead of just like what you saw in Debbie Does Dallas. I think what they said in the original Debbie Does Dallas, they filmed like the sex scenes and like the last sex scene in like 3 or 4 days, because they really just wanted to get all the angles. They really wanted to make sure it looked very well done. This was kind of just like, okay, they're both in bed. Sometimes if you film it from the side, you're not really going to see anything. But so they really just didn't care, you know. And I just kind of really emphasize that the reason why I keep repeating that is just because I know when you watch a movie, you definitely know when it's a piece of shit, and you definitely kind of know when it was not there for quality, it was there to kind of like make money. So what happens is that when she's at the brothel, you know, that's how it starts and that's how it ends. But also what happens is that they randomly cut to like I think a high school or a college fraternity. And what happens is that there's a bunch of students who want to visit the brothel. So they're kind of like, you know what, we have to go incognito because the coach is making a rule that if anybody gets caught at that brothel, they automatically get kicked off on the sports team. Because, you know, again, it's kind of Texas, southern place, very Christian. You know, they definitely, you know, it's definitely a thing too where there is adult entertainment and other things, but they want to teach their kids to be holier than thou, really. You know, like that hypocrisy. You know, even in the South and other places, there's still there's still such debauchery, and how, you know, people want to encourage their kids to kind of like be holier than thou, and save their virginity to start and for sex, no sex before marriage, and virginity until they start a family. Like, you know, and these kids are like, no, we're actually horny kids and whatever. So I kind of like how that's kind of like satirized, like the hypocrisy, and then these kids are just doing what they want. So I believe what happens is that because it gets a little confusing, I believe what happens is that these kids actually dress up as police officers, and the coach goes along with them as well, really. So they all dress up like 2 police officers and the sheriff. So that way, obviously, they're in disguise. So anybody can kind of, so that way a couple things happens. They don't have to pay a lot of, they get a free, they they get a free fuck. They don't have to pay the $15 or whatever for a prostitute. And this was in the '80s, so I definitely think with inflation, it would be kind of reasonable. I mean, that $15 was a lot of money. Um, or I think it's kind of reminiscent of like earlier times in history where obviously less money was a lot. But there were two P kids, and they were actually there were these two football players. So what happens is that they have a three-way with one of the prostitutes, and then what happens is the coach, he actually, I believe he has like a three-way, but it's like him and two women, and then it turns into him and Debbie mostly, and then they have sex with each other. So the coach is dressing up like the sheriff, really. So it kind of is a homage to the original Debbie Does Dallas, where she has sex with Mr. Greensfield, the head coach. So she's kind of getting back into the things that she's turned on by, which is Mr. Greensfield had kind of like the high school track team, and no, like the high school cheerleader, and like the high school quarterback, or like the MVP, or the high school like football captain, and she's kind of getting into that, like that power role play. Like she's the cheerleader, she's the female cheerleader, but because because the most important figure on a football team is the male coach. There is a sense of like the power issues, like and then also when people talk about like cheerleaders, cheerleaders don't get paid as much, but like football stars do, and obviously coaches get paid a lot as well because they're running the team. So it is kind of that idea of the ultimate male figure, that has power, and football versus the woman that has the most power, which is usually the most attractive or the head of the cheerleader squad. So it's almost like so it is kind of like a role play. It's of power. Like the man has he's more powerful than her. He's awesome because he can do this, and then obviously because I think in this film she's still supposed to be a 16-year-old or a high school senior. I'm like a 23-year-old playing a high school senior. Obviously, there is a sense of that fetish of, okay, well, obviously, track football coach or any type of sports coach cannot do that to any of the cheerleaders in high school unless they're over 18 years old. No, even if they're over 18 years old, they can't do that unless obviously that person graduates. Still very weird, but and not okay really. But obviously, this is kind of like a fantasy of, okay, well, for all the coaches and all the people who love sports, here's the fantasy of, you can actually nail the cheerleader if you are actually, in a position of authority, or if you're somebody with that football fetish of, okay, you want to bang with the cheerleaders, that's off limits. And then what some people don't know is that it's actually sexual harassment, sexual assault, because obviously one thing that you're not supposed to do is if you have power over somebody, like if it is a position like if you are a football coach and you're having sex with the head cheerleader, that's not allowed, because obviously you could be her boss, or you can kind of be like, okay, well, I'm going to talk to the cheerleader captain or the cheerleader coach, and they're in their 20s, and I'm going to get this person released from the team. So there is a sense of, okay, well, it's sexual harassment, I believe, because you can obviously, or sexual assault in some cases, because it's obviously, well, I can, a person can actually talk to, the coach can get, there's this person removed, or this person can talk to the coach of the cheerleading squad and have that person removed or whatever. So obviously there is a sense of coercion. So that's kind of why it's more of a taboo fantasy and more of a power fantasy, but also more of an objectification fantasy. But and just to reiterate, it's definitely not a good film, because it's not like she ever made it home. She kind of finds the bordello home, so it's not that well made. You filmed in some cold areas of Texas. You filmed in a made up jail. Then you filmed in a brothel, and that's that really. There's really no I mean, I know the budget was kind of to be small, but obviously, if you look at ambitious films, this was not really that ambitiously made. I think that there could have been way more ideas. Um, then also another thing too is that I believe like when you watch this whole film, there's maybe less than 10 people having sex versus like the original Debbie Does Dallas, where there's more people. And then also there was a bigger storyline in Debbie Does Dallas. You kind of saw Debbie and her friends kind of had their own scenes. Whereas this time Debbie has three scenes, and even the scenes with the other people, they're not that well shot and whatever. And then the other thing that I will kind of say is definitely in the original Debbie Does Dallas. I think yeah she exposes her body, her breasts early on in that film, and then at the end you actually see her have sex. So there was the sense of warming the audience, like, oh, I want to see the ending, I want to see how it ends, because the hottest girl is going to get the hottest scene at the end. Where in this film, you start it with a sex scene, and usually, as they say, that honestly, if you're going to watch something like Lord of the Rings, obviously all the great fights that happen, they don't start it in the first scene. You wait to the very end to kind of get into that. So I definitely, as I said, that's not really good writing, and it doesn't hold a candle to the original one. It's definitely a cash grab. And there's actually some stories about this film that some people were saying that it was a bootleg. There are other people, and I've read some reviews about it, that some people were even saying things like, okay, it's actually has a lot of stock footage from the original film, but no, it's totally different. It's supposed to be a continuation, and I believe there's other Debbie Does Dallas films, but it's not with Bambi Woods because she actually retired after this. So this is also kind of a bit of a collector's film as well for a lot of people, because they're like, okay, this is, and I believe this is the last film that she did really in adult films, So it does hold a bunch of controversy, but it's definitely controversial for its drop of quality. It's definitely controversial for being called 100% by Hustler when it really doesn't deserve it. And then also, it's objectification of women, featuring sexual acts where it's a woman being forced to do things, and they're saying no, and they kind of just eventually just go along with it and get into the sex as well, really, and not and kind of be complacent, and that's a bad attitude, because obviously if you're having sex with somebody, let's say if you want to have anal sex, you don't do something like lube yourself up, put yourself in somebody, they pull it out and say no, that hurts, and then you keep doing it, and then they keep saying no, and then eventually they don't say no anymore, and then they have an orgasm, and then they're like, okay, that's the most beautiful thing ever. That's not good, and that also reinforces the rape culture and rape stereotypes about saying, okay, eventually they're gonna like it, type of thing. Um, it reminds me of a very disturbing story. Like when I used to work out of college, and there was like the sexual harassment officer, and she was like, she used to be a lawyer, and she did say that she worked out of college, and there was a sexual assault that happened at that college. And one of the things that did happen was the exact same thing in this film, where somebody, where a girl said no, and then this guy kept on going, and then he said, you know what, I think that she was gonna like it and whatever. And you see that in kind of older films like this, where, as I said, it's like the guy starts the sexual acts, they kind of just are forcive, or if it's the first time they meet a girl, they kind of force stuff on her, and she eventually gets into it and warms up to it, and that's not, that was never appropriate unless they had a relationship, and it's kind of like a fetish, a domination fetish type of thing, really, but and consensual, but it definitely kind of features a lot of just non-consensual sex, and I definitely think that if you look at a lot of older films, it probably has that, because there's a sense of power play, but it's unfortunate because it's definitely encourages audience members to think that, okay, well, it really objectifies women, and it really shows that when it's sex with a woman, it's really going after what you want instead of actually being a mutual thing. So it's definitely controversial for that, and that's really it. Really, I definitely think that this could have been more well made. I wish they kind of cared a little bit more. And definitely too, I think that sometimes when people have opportunities to make films, and the first one makes a lot of money, even if they didn't see a lot of profit from it, you can always do a second film, and that's the one you make cash on. So I wish that there was more thought put into this, but obviously it is what it is, really. And then also when people make adult films, they're not always thinking about making this really thought out thing. They're more so thinking about making money. So that's kind of it with it.